Happy New Year, and welcome to the Entertainment Room. I'm sad Christmas is over, but I'm looking forward to the new year and what it holds. With these major holidays gone now, I will try and start to vary the genres and types of films a little bit more. Some winter films, of course, just not so holiday focused. Just some also seemingly random choices as well. Films I love, or at least love to discuss. Today, I will review the 2019 film Cold Pursuit, a remake to a Norwegian film of a similar story called In Order of Disappearance. I actually have not seen that original film. It took me a while to realize this was a remake, but I saw this film in theaters back in 2019. I'm unsure what drove my wife and I to go see it at that time. We've both seen and enjoyed Liam Neeson action films, crime films, drama, whatever, but several are a bit mundane in story and just kind of formulaic. Cold Pursuit, judging by the trailer alone, felt similar, so I don't know. I don't know if we were just desperate to see a movie in the theater at that time, or what, but we landed on this one with not much in terms of expectations. To say the least, the tone of this film, based off the simple trailer, and the first 15 to 20 minutes or so feels vastly different than what we eventually get. Much different than what we expected. This is a film that has been on my mind quite often here and there since the original viewing. So, how is Cold Pursuit? And how is it different from what you get typically from a Liam Neeson action film? Cold Pursuit was directed by Hans Peter Moland, who was actually the director of the original In Order of Disappearance. It's always interesting when directors remake their own films. But anyways, Frank Baldwin is the writer. Kim Phupps Åkesson has a credit as well for his writing involvement because of his screenplay for the original. I'm unsure how similar Cold Pursuit is to the original idea, but I have read that it's pretty close. Maybe a little too close to warrant a remake, but personally, I cannot say for certain. With remakes, if that remake adds a new idea, or expands on the idea, or puts like an interesting twist on the story, they can be fine. But oftentimes, they just kind of do the same thing, and on top of that, make it less interesting. So my viewing of that film may drop my rating, or alter this one a bit, maybe. But for now, I'll just review Cold Pursuit as it is, as a standalone film. So before I get into the film itself, Liam Neeson. As a whole, I enjoy this actor. He's not often the most versatile, and plays a lot of similar personalities with similar storylines, but he still carries the lead role well. I like his stern demeanor and voice combined with his accent. And he's been a part of some incredible work, his most notable probably being Schindler's List, arguably, or for his action films Taken. And over the years, he's dipped into comedy a bit, here and there, or skits, or has been a part of comedy films briefly. And in those comedic works, he's not really switching it up to be some unusually extroverted, loud, or bright figure. Oftentimes, it comes in the form of funny situations happening around him, or to him. He either has an amusing reaction, or he's just being overly serious in a really absurd moment. My absolute favorite scene being the grocery store scene in the comedy Ted, where he's super paranoid and defensive about buying a box of tricks, thinking that he'll be followed. Just, even if you haven't watched that film, there's a chance that you've seen that exchange on social media or something. It's just fucking legendary, and a scene that I revisit often. But so for our story, Liam Neeson plays Nels, a snowplow driver seeking revenge against drug dealers who killed his son Kyle, who is actually played by Liam Neeson's real-life eldest son. A straightforward, basic premise that opens in a seemingly simplistic and formulaic way, If this film maintained the bland dryness and typical crime thriller trope it introduced up until about 15 to 20 minutes into the film in a self-serious fashion, it would have easily been forgotten, for sure. But, to say the least, the inspiration of this feels like Fargo with a satire, but blown up in quite an extraordinary way. I remember in the theater being caught off guard multiple times, especially in the beginning. Random bits of comedy dispersed throughout. I just remember my wife and I, plus the rest of the audience, just slowly started to realize what this film was, and we were still surprised off and on later. There's just this hesitant and confused laughing from all of us, getting something we were not expecting at all. But we slowly started to embrace it. Judging by the trailer, this is like a basic crime thriller. Again, the only hint at comedy being an odd moment where you had a song playing up until one point, then all of a sudden it cuts and you see Liam Neeson awkwardly dragging a body across the ground. And it's making this weird squeaking sound as he's dragging him. I just overall was not prepared for what this film was. Basically, just these actions or conversations you weren't expecting to hear. Serious characters either doing bizarre things or having bizarre things happening around them. And what otherwise feels like a run-of-the-mill revenge plot. The performances are intentionally just so stern and rigid almost, in such a peculiar way, particularly with the criminals involved. Just these crime thriller stereotypes in a hilariously over-the-top manner. And the effort isn't as polished as a film like Fargo, and likely not even as much as An Order of Disappearance, since that was the original idea. But it still beautifully flips the genre on its head in an effectively satirical fashion, just poking fun at these tired tropes. Tom Bateman actually portrays my favorite performance in this as our drug lord and lead villain, who is Trevor Calcote, or Viking. He's of course angry, cold-blooded, violent, and frankly, a sociopath. Intimidating to a certain extent, but in the spirit of this dark comedy, still pretty tough to take seriously. Almost like a more awkward and less calculated Patrick Bateman type appearance, reeking of rich parents, money, and privilege. And also intolerant to processed foods and poor grammar, apparently. But anyway, he does do awful things, oftentimes just on the fly. But his blow-ups and his tantrums, his rants, are just the best things, because they're just so childish and out of character for a serious villain. With a lot of pouting and flailing his arms even. Terrific performance that balances what's needed for the altering tones, I think. Neeson as Nels is mostly himself, personality-wise. Stern and almost isolative. Doesn't really open up even to his family. He has some comical reactions to events around him, but it's mostly dialogue between other characters that are humorous. They don't much focus on fleshing his character out. It doesn't feel like. He just has these very linear goals, this linear mindset. I did feel for him and his family, though, as a whole. Laura Dern plays his wife, Grace. I always enjoy appearances from her, especially the likes of Jurassic Park, of course. Also, there's not really many prolonged action scenes for an action film. There's enough action to keep it interesting, I think, because there is quite a high body count. A little touch I enjoyed with each death was a little title card that would appear afterwards, after somebody died, with their name and their street name if they had one. This was particularly amusing when you don't see a character die before their name appears. A couple times it appears a character is going to live or cut a deal with somebody, for instance, and then you just get this abrupt transition proving otherwise. The story is still very basic outside of the satire interwoven in it. Not many surprises in plot progression, so either appreciate how farcically the premise plays out, or you may not enjoy this unless the action scenes are enough for you. But also with the violence and the deadpan deliveries from a lot of these characters, people have drawn comparisons to the Tarantino style, and to a certain extent, I can see the influence. Especially if you think Hateful Eight or something of that sort. Whatever that means to your taste. So I will get into some spoilers next. I personally enjoy Cold Pursuit as a whole. A decent black comedy. Not as good as Fargo or the like, but it's a fun time if you enjoy the absurdity of films like this. Still a fine crime thriller. I just feel the story on its own doesn't carry enough weight to really stand out as memorable. But now we'll get into some spoilers. The beginning, again, is a simple setup. You don't get much time to grow attached to Nels, Grace, or Kyle. For its purpose, I guess it's enough. And it was sad to see the rapid deterioration of the marriage after Kyle's death. And there were some issues beforehand with Nels, not, opening up or bonding with Kyle as far as having actual conversations. But frustration is all she seems to feel towards Nels after Kyle's death. They got along as a whole beforehand. She was, supportive of his Person of the Year award for the town. She would do little things like help him with his sleeves and his cufflinks if he was getting dressed up for something. And then after the fact, with their strain, she just didn't do those things anymore. And of course, to make matters worse, Nels just didn't try and open up and talk things out with her, didn't try and cope. He just kind of stayed to himself. And then the only conversation they really have after the funeral is when she basically gets onto Nels for not getting to know him. She would be like, "Oh, what did you guys even talk about on your hunting trips? Well, did you know about Kyle?" And he said, "We went to hunt," basically, was his response. And then, of course, she eventually leaves him. But in all this darkness in the first bit, you slowly at first get odd and subtle hints at satire being involved. The first moment, I think, was them identifying Kyle's body in the morgue. It's quiet, it's depressing. There's obnoxious, bright lights. But then an employee pulls Kyle's body from a low shelf in the morgue and starts to manually, pump the lever to raise him up. And it is the longest, most awkward process. Double-digit pumps easily, and everyone's just kind of staring at each other or at the ground. Viking, again, is just a damn tyrant. A goofy Ivy League frat bro type, but still. Terrible father to his son Ryan. Detached and giving terrible advice. This character does kill with no emotion, as you might expect. But I almost always had a laugh when he was on screen each time. Just this haphazard, deranged, wacky kind of personality. His tantrums, his sarcasm are pretty childish. Some of the funniest incidents are him and his ex-wife, Aya, arguing about Ryan and his well-being. At one point, he literally stomps around his house, looking for Ryan's gym bag, throwing his arms around and even boots a damn exercise ball out of his way. And all this anger and vitriol are often only met with a demeanor of mild inconvenience from his wife, or his ex-wife. Even when she had the goddamn grip of death on his old cojones, after he tried to swing on her. To go back to Liam Neeson, unlike a lot of his action films, he doesn't really have a particular set of skills here. He's a hunter, and he's pissed as hell with a boiling desire for vengeance. A one-track mind, kill anyone involved with his son's death after he discovers these different connections, and his attacks on these different individuals with fucking dumbass codenames are brutal in the blood that is spilled, but rather short. He demands info, typically has to beat it out of them, in the process giving the Tooth Fairy some extra work. And realistically, these people will likely be harder to access, especially for an originally normal citizen like Nels. But clown shows like this film work differently from reality, obviously. The most ridiculous likely being his first kill. Don't get me wrong, his encounter with Speedo is equal parts comical and dark. But I've never seen a guy with active security guards near him be presented with a threatening presence, then proceed to go by himself to try and escort him out. Made it way too easy for the heartbroken man. And then Nels even fatigues easily, beating up on another guy named Santa. They share a laugh about their rough conditions, while Nels simultaneously grabs his rifle and opens up his mind a bit. With Viking's gang being as menacing as their actions are, they don't seem the brightest. I feel like a drug lord shouldn't be a complete loose cannon. I'm sure there's examples I'm not thinking of proving otherwise, but beside the point, the other gang Viking's dad had agreed to coexist with was a Native American group of dealers led by White Bull. And Viking just pisses this piece away on a random, and I mean random, theory. Before he learns about Nels, he discovered 3 deaths from his team, and in a racially charged rant, he just assumes it's the Indians, in his words. No investigation, phone call, anything to try and avoid starting a damn turf war. Fuck it, kill the leader's son. Why not? That always makes him back down. Now White Bull wants revenge. A son for a son. A character I did enjoy, actually, despite the brief screen time, was the assassin Nels hires through a friend named Wingman, and that assassin is the Eskimo. Completely cliche, yes. Emotionless, stone cold, but these crime cliches and tropes in this film flow beautifully overall with the comedy, and it's really what makes it work. One of the unexpected moments was Nels joining him in a taxi after they meet up so he can take him to his hotel. He demands the cab driver change a song on the radio to, in his words, anything else. So, he plays that notorious Barbie Girl song instead. Then this is met with a cold stare from the Eskimo, then him demanding Nels take it out of his tip. Just the timing of the silence and stare, plus the delivery, was just fantastic. But then the Eskimo's death by Viking's gang also helped to take them a bit more seriously, at least a sliver more seriously. Kind of the first time we see them kill somebody perfectly willing to help them for a fee that I can't imagine would be too steep for this organization. Any helpful source of info, as it turns out, results in death. In watching this film back, I can see the humor not working for some, especially if it's not what they were expecting in the first place. It can be oddly placed at times or even forced, but I still love the dryness it brings. And some moments are very simple as a device moving extra slow in what is supposed to be an intense or emotional moment, especially when there's silence otherwise. Despite that, of course, one of the main scenes I'm referencing being the morgue scene again that I mentioned earlier. Another one is a time that White Bull's gang is getting ready, and they need to get in the back of a truck, and the lift ever so gradually ascends them into the vehicle. There's no other conversation going or anything, just a halt and momentum in the moment. Something of a similar vibe was Dexter being shot by Viking, and he falls onto a white inflatable couch, making a hilarious sound effect. Plus, Viking then intentionally puts another bullet directly into the couch instead, thus intensifying the deflation. What makes the moment funnier after the fact was imagining the process of an angry, uptight drug lord shopping and picking out such an item for their home. Adults also randomly act out of character, or even kind of childlike. White Bull and his crew at one point just start randomly playing in the snow at a ski resort. And then Gip, the older, near-retirement cop, characteristically has no interest in pursuing the gang war, unlike his new partner Kim. What he is completely fixated on, though, is her using her ex back in Denver, who is also a cop, to get information on the parties involved in this war, but not agreeing to give him another shot. He's just so invested in their story, almost like he's watching a soap opera or a bad romance movie. And when I say with this film that I have a slight complaint about the more shallow story and straightforward tropes, I get that that's likely the main purpose for the running joke in the film. I just found myself invested in a few different aspects and characters in this case that I just wanted to know more about, but it basically results to nothing in the end. So that's maybe slightly frustrating. I feel like they focused on Kim a lot, Officer Kim, and her putting the pieces together and really building her character kind of, but then it all just kind of fizzles out. That's the best way to describe most characters and their story. I guess it's more realistic that hard work doesn't always lead you to get ahead of an investigation before it falls apart, but still. I was also kind of intrigued by Ryan and Nell's relationship. After he kidnaps Ryan, they have this unusual bond, and there's subtle hints at Nell's trying to be a better father figure despite the bizarre situation. But I guess we can't really expect to get much more out of that. And he does leave him alone after the shootout to go back to work essentially. But the cops still there. I guess there's not much else you can do. Basically, we're just taking this generic and routine plot and just having so much exaggerated fun with it. And then the final shootout was fine. All the goofy mistakes and the inaccurate messages led all these parties to one all-out brawl. I guess it all just feels a little bit anticlimactic with what we're left with. Nell's going back to work instantly with the snowplow just kind of content. And maybe the film could be saying that all this revenge and violence doesn't necessarily lead to these grand rewards or peace of mind. No epic getaway or conclusion for Nels, just business as usual. But maybe it's just simply not that deep by the end of it. But anyways, the final scene with him going back to work, it's kind of a nice final touch with White Bull initially getting in the snowplow with him, holding him at gunpoint. But then Nels is just unconcerned, because he never had any ill will towards him. White Bull even gets a damn nap in and wakes up, panicked at first, but just relaxes when he sees that Nels is in the same position, doing the same thing he was doing since the beginning. And they just have this weird, silent comfort and camaraderie. And then an epic final laugh that I was not expecting was the character Avalanche from White Bull's gang, who 20 minutes ago, when they're at the ski resort, did the weird parachute, base jumping activity. I don't know what the fuck it's called. But then he never came back down, and he's just now, I'm guessing maybe about a day later, finally coming down, still stuck in the air. Now all of a sudden just kind of pulls up beside them casually. And then it makes for an interesting final death when he collides with a snowplow. Tack that on with the confused, horrified looks on Nels and White Bull's faces. And then that's Cold Pursuit. A premise and execution that works just fine for me. A film that I think about from time to time. I do want to watch the original, In Order of Disappearance someday. And how that goes could affect my rating for this one, if I feel this was an unnecessary remake or uninspired or bland in comparison. But I can't do that yet. I'll always have this film, though, as one of the most memorable theater experiences that I've had. It's not a life-changing film, but it's a nice contrast from other films of this type, especially other Liam Neeson films. I'll go maybe a 7 out of 10 for now. Flawed in how it handles its characters and the story, plus it's a remake. But to be fair, it's really hard to impress people with a remake anyway. There's plenty here that I would revisit again. But anyway, I hope this review was enjoyable. Happy New Year. I hope to grow my podcast a bit more this year, so I'm still trying to figure things out. But I am just so incredibly excited to keep working. And I am working on a movie series and doing another ranking episode, like my Paranormal Activity one. It may take a minute, especially the multiple installments and my schedule, but I'll try and keep everybody up to date. That's all for now. Until next time on The Entertainment Room.